All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that there are some handouts that are attached to this GoToWebinar. Those handouts will have the instructions from Microsoft about year-end close for each of the modules that we talk about today. They are step-by-step instructions, and there's also some frequently asked questions. These do match the knowledge base articles that Microsoft publishes. However, I did make a couple of updates to those, especially in the 1099 section for this year, as the 1099s are new this year. The IRS has requested to split out the forms between a standard 1099 miscellaneous and a 1099 NEC. We will talk about where those new changes are today. All right, so the year-end checklist. There are some things that you can do right now before you even hit the end of the year that you should probably be doing kind of on an ongoing basis, and also some planning. So start planning with your IT team, your operations, your accounting, about who's going to be available, who's going to be out, making sure that you have the key people available and to finish those tasks in time for year end. We do recommend that you create your new fiscal year. You're going to be able to create this so that you can post I'm going to give you 1 second so I can show you how to do this. But you're going to be able to post your transactions and your budgets. You're going to be able to find this in the company settings. Give me 1 second here to bring my GP screen over. There we go. So your new fiscal year is going to be set up under Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. If you have not set up your 2021 year, you'd go ahead and type in 2021, hit Tab, and you'll just want to make sure that those dates actually read January to December if you're on a standard calendar fiscal year. If not, you want to make sure that the year that you set up matches your fiscal year, and then you'll hit the Calculate button here. Now in this test database, it's actually been already set up, so I'm going to set up 2041. So you'll see that my dates here, I'm going to go ahead and set that to December 31st of 2041. When I click the Calculate button, it will go ahead and set up my 12 periods for me. So you do want to make sure you do that as soon as possible. You can control who posts into those periods if you don't want people posting into those periods, just by marking the boxes here and closing those from posting. Closing does not actually create any processes in the back end. It's simply a trigger for the system to say, hey, that period is closed, so I won't allow anybody to post into it. All right, back to our presentation. You want to finalize any on your applicable transactions. Normally you should be doing this monthly to make sure that your transactions are falling within the right time period. And you want to reconcile your subledgers to the general ledger. So your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, and your inventory, and also your bank accounts. You want to make sure that those all reconcile to your general ledger. You want to plan for where to store record copies of your year-end reports. Normally, you do want to print out some hard copies, especially if you have any audit requirements, just so you can kind of take a capture of what was in the system at that particular time when you closed. And then you want to make sure that there are backups taken during the process of year end. And you do want to make sure that those backups are stored off-site, just in case that there is a problem with your system. Make sure that they don't get deleted and you can have a restore. We are able to recover a lot of information if by chance somebody, accidentally deletes, uses some of those utilities in a way that they should not. If you have a year-end backup, we can restore some information. You also want to talk to your IT. You want to make sure that you've talked to them about where those backups will be stored. Make sure there's enough hard drive space to make sure that those backups can be stored, and also that your server is just in a good working condition and that you don't have your SQL servers taking up excessive space. You want to make sure that your overnight backups, how often are they retained? For example, maybe you forgot to take a backup before you closed your accounts payable. Sometimes an overnight backup can be copied and it can be retained. And also, at the end, you want to let them know what went well this year and maybe recap so that you can make sure that things are working well for next year. All right. Before December 31st or January 31st or on January 1st, we suggest you review your open purchase orders, post any PO processing receipts, and process the invoices for any inventory received. We also suggest you review your open sales orders, make sure that any invoices that are outstanding have been created are posted, and make sure that any returns that can be processed have been processed and posted for the fiscal year. There are some tasks that we do recommend you do on January 1st or December 31st before transactions are posted for January 1st. The reason why we recommend that these are done is because there are some non-date sensitive tables in there. And what I mean by that is that if you don't do it on January 1st, some of your 2021 information could leak into your 2020 periods on some of these key fields. These fields are mostly going to be found on reports and smart lists. They are documented in the handout that is attached. However, it's not the end of the world if they don't get updated. All of those fields are updatable through the user interface if you needed to actually recopy them. I do know some companies that haven't closed out their inventory, payables, or receivables for a very long time. And so they go ahead and just start at the end of the year, and they just know that whatever's listed in their last year to date column is just going to include all of that information. So inventory year-end close, receivables year-end close, payables year-end close, and your payroll year-end close should all be done before you start processing transactions in any of those modules. After January 1st, you do want to close or print your 1099s just to verify them. You can print your W-2s, your 1095Cs, and your 1099Rs. You can do any of that anytime after January 1st. So it doesn't have to be done on January 1st, just after the year closes. The same is true for the general ledger, and I guess I should have specified that on here. The general ledger can be closed anytime after the first of the year. Just be aware that without closing the general ledger, you will not have your balance forward accounts and your balance sheet accounts, and so your financial statements will be impacted by that. All right, there is actually a suggested order in which to close the modules. The attachment that we have does include these modules in the correct order. You'll notice that sales order processing and purchase order processing are listed there. We're going to go ahead and start with those modules. There are nothing in the attachment that refers to these modules, and that's because there are no specific year-end closing processes. So what we do is we just recommend that you do have a month-end checklist, and then it becomes your year-end checklist. Double check for your invoices and returns, double check for your receivers and your invoice match processes, and make sure that you've reconciled your received, not invoice report to your accrued purchases liability accounts. All right, so the first module that you will close will be inventory. We do recommend you post all your transactions for the year. You reconcile your inventory quantities to GP. And again, these steps are all covered in those handouts. So if I go too fast, just know that you can follow along there. Wrap up your physical year-end count and any related variance adjustments. We do recommend using the stock count schedules for this process. And with the newest update to Dynamics GP, you can now actually export your stock count schedules to Excel, update them there, and then re-import them. And that will actually save a lot of time. There are certain reports that you want to make sure to run, because after you close, these reports will change. So you may want to archive them for your own purposes. And then make sure to review your discontinued items. When you close your inventory, one of the options you have is to remove discontinued items. You don't have to remove discontinued items, but if you have discontinued items where the entire inventory has been sold, the system will allow you to remove those items. And before you close every module, we do recommend you make a backup specific to that module that you're going to close. That helps us as consultants, when you have a problem, go back and take a look at that particular module before closing, and then compare it to what's happened after close in case there's any problems. So this screen that you're seeing here is what the inventory year-end closing screen looks like. You're going to see that it is, you do have three options here: remove discontinued item, remove sold lot attributes, and remove receipts and cost changes. cost change history prior to a particular date. These 3 boxes are covered in detail in the attachments, but just be aware that if you do mark remove discontinued items, it will remove the history for those items as well. And so a lot of companies will choose to do that at a particular date after they've reviewed how long that discontinued item has been in the system. You'll also have this option here to update the item standard cost. You do not want to run the year-end close process just to do this one thing. You want to make sure that if you need your standard cost updated, there are other ways to do that. But normally when you close, you're going to, if you use lots, we do recommend, you know, maybe marking the sold lot attributes, but you don't necessarily need to mark anything on the screen. Just go ahead and click process, and it will close the module. It will close the fiscal periods in the inventory. We do recommend closing the fiscal periods in the inventory series to prevent postings after it's been closed. Okay, and the next module we're going to talk about is accounts receivable. So on accounts receivable, you want to make sure to do this close process on December 31st. And the areas that are truly not sensitive to date, and what we mean by that is that it will allow documents that are dated in 2021 to leak into 2020 if it's not closed, or vice versa. The amount since last close view in the customer summary and the customer finance charge summary. Those 2 areas are updated when we do this process, so we do recommend that you do the closing on as close to the end of the month before transactions are posted for the new year. We do also recommend that you run the reconcile process. Within the utilities section, there is a reconcile. You can run this as many times as you want, and it will not cause any problems or issues in your system. We do recommend that you reconcile your outstanding document amounts and your current customer information. Also, you can reconcile your calendar year and your fiscal year. However, these 2 right here will really help you if you're having some trouble tying out your accounts receivable to your general ledger. Sometimes the summary information on the customer card, for whatever reason, may become incorrect due to the outstanding document amount. So we do recommend running the outstanding document amounts first, then running the current customer information, and that should make sure that your system is as accurate as possible. All right, we do recommend completing your month-end processes by, you know, posting all of your recurring receivables management batches, reconciling your agent reports, review your unapplied documents report. We do suggest that if you can apply any documents and receivables that is reasonable, go ahead and do so. A lot of times you'll have customers who hang out there with 0 balances, and it's just because there are 2 documents that need to be applied. Then you'll want to run the receivables management year-end closing process. Now you'll notice that there are 3 options here. There's an all, a fiscal, and a calendar. If your fiscal year does not match a calendar year, you will need to run this process twice, once at the fiscal year and once at the calendar year. And that is because there are actually financial fields for both fiscal and calendar year. And then you'll want to go ahead and close your periods in the sales series. All right. Now we're going to talk about closing the payables module. When you close the payables module, it will update the 1099 amounts year to date, the 1099 amounts for last year, and the amounts since last close. So again, you want to make sure to do this before any transactions are created for the 2021 year. If you have to cut some checks into 2021 and you have not closed this module yet, our recommendation is just do not post that check batch until your year-end is closed. Once the year-end is closed, then go ahead and post that check batch. We do, again, suggest running the reconcile process as often as you would like, but you'll notice that there is a summary reconcile here. Of course, there's a fiscal year and calendar year, but that summary reconcile will make sure that everything in detail on your agent reports matches the vendor summary record. And again, it can help you with when you're reconciling your general ledger to your accounts receivable or your accounts payable. You just want to make sure that if you're looking at a summary report, it's as accurate as possible. All right, we want to again, we complete the same processes that you should be following through the month end. Post all of your transactions, reconcile to your GL, print the vendor period analysis reports for your records. The vendor period analysis report will change once you close the year end, so it's a good idea to print that and store it away in case, again, questions or audits. This year is especially important to install the payroll year end to capture the tax form changes for the 1099s. As I mentioned earlier, the IRS has changed the 1099s, and Microsoft has released an update for November that includes all of those changes. So if you have not scheduled for your final year-end update, we just want to make sure that you contact us here at Implementation Specialist so we can get you on the schedule to have you updated. And then after you close, run your 1099s for the vendors. Their instructions for running your 1099s are in the documentation that I've attached. Also, there are steps in there on how to fix if you have a 1099 vendor that was not marked as a 1099 vendor, or if you have somebody who was marked as a 1099 vendor and was not. All right, so this here is just showing you where the updates are for the new the November update. You'll notice that on the tax type, we now have a tax type of non-employee compensation that's found there under the options. You're going to notice that the 1099s are actually going to break out the non-employee compensation. Instead of it listed in box 7, it will now be listed in box 1 of a Form 1099 NEC. And then when you print your 1099s, you're going to have the option to choose the 1099 NEC format, and that'll make sure that when you print that, it does have the right format for the 1099 NEC blank forms. All right. For payables, you want to run the payables year-end closing process. Again, if you have a fiscal year and a calendar year that are not the same, you're going to want to run it at 2 different times. And then you can print your 1099s after closing your payables management module. Your 1099 printing is unrelated to closing payables management. And what that means is that you can print your 1099s before, you can go back and print your 1099s after. And then, of course, we recommend close the fiscal period so you can prevent postings into the prior year if you've closed those for your staff. Now, a lot of people don't know, but there is an option to close the tax year in Dynamics GP. A lot of companies have not done this before, and that's fine. What it does is that you have a year-to-date and a last year-to-date, your tax maintenance screens, and that will update those and make sure that those are reset. So again, if you've never done this before, now's a good time to start. Your last year-to-date will be a summary of your will be a summary of everything up until your year is finished. So if you closed it right now and you've never closed it before, your last year-to-date is going to include 2020 all the way back, and your 2021 will be in the current year-to-date. In 2022, when you close your 2021, then your last year-to-date will be correct. All right, fixed assets. It's important that you close out the payables module before you can start on your fixed assets closing, because your payables module will feed into your fixed assets. So you just want to make sure that all those transactions are posted that you expect to be in your payables module. You want to make sure in your fixed asset module you've posted all your additions, your retirements, and your transfers. And you want to depreciate all the assets through the last day of the current fiscal year. Now, you can perform the GL posting. We kind of do recommend you do the GL posting at the same time. If you have not done the GL posting, it is optional to do it at this time, but you do want to make sure it's done at some point. The handouts will show you which reports to run for your fixed assets. There are a handful of reports that you will want to run and keep on hand that will be affected by your year-end close. You'll want to make sure that the fixed assets calendar and quarters are correct. Now, if you're new to your system, definitely check this step if you've used your system for quite some time. I still recommend taking a look at them, but it's not as critical. Make sure that you run a backup, and then go ahead and run the year-end closing process for fixed assets. Payroll, we will not be covering payroll just due to the time. We will have a separate webinar on Thursday that will talk about payroll. So we're going to go straight to the general ledger. So finalizing the year-end close for general ledger. One thing that everybody should note is that you can close your general ledger and still post to a previous period as long as it's 1 year back. So if you're closing your 2020 year and you're now moving into your 2021 fiscal year, you can still post into 2020, and the system will go ahead and make a adjusting period or adjusting entry in the beginning balance period to account for the retained earnings and the balance forwards on your balance sheet. If you need to post back further than that, as long as you're on GP 2013 or later, you'll be able to open up those years. We just recommend that you take a backup before you do that. Then you can open up those years and reclose the years after the entries you needed to be made have been made. You'll want to verify your account types before closing. My recommendation is just to run a smart list to look at your GL accounts. Make sure that everything that's an asset is a balance sheet. Make sure that everything that's an income statement is marked as an income statement account. If you close the year and one of those accounts was marked incorrectly, for example, you had a balance sheet account marked as an income statement, it used to be quite a lengthy process for us to correct that. However, now our recommendation is you can reverse that year-end close, correct the account by setting it in the correct way, then redo the year-end close, and that will fix your account type that's been incorrect. However, you know, prevention is the best remedy, so we do recommend just running a smart list and verifying your account types. If you're using unit accounts, make sure that you've set the beginning balance option how you expect it to be set. You'll want to finalize your adjustments, post any single-use batches. You'll also want to verify that all your retained earnings accounts exist. What we mean by that is that you normally will have one retained earnings account unless you're choosing to close to department segments. Within Dynamics GP, you can choose different segments to close to. If you choose this option, you do have to make sure that a retained earning account exists for every one of those segments, even if there's nothing on your income statement for those segments. GP will validate that every segment has been set up before it will allow it to close. We do recommend printing your detailed trial balance, and if you're using Management Reporter, printing your financials is not such a big deal. However, if you're using Dynamics GP to generate your financial reports, you do want to make sure to print your financials. And then you'll want to verify that all the accounts close to the correct type. And I guess that's kind of a repeat of what we talked about your account types being checked earlier. I apologize for that being duplicated here on this slide. So what does the year-end close process do in GP? The first step is that it validates those transactions in that retained earnings account. So if those segments that we talked about earlier, those department segments, you're closing your retained earnings to departments. If that segment is not set up for every retained earnings account, it will stop at step 1 and ask you to correct. It then validates verifies the account balances. It will verify the fiscal year information. The posting numbers and the transaction numbers are reconciled, just to make sure that the numbers that you're seeing are actually valid, similar to the reconcile process within the general ledger module itself. Your beginning balances are brought forward and your retained earnings are created and the distributions are moved to history. So it does take all the general ledger entries for that current year and moves it into the historical year. It then creates the entries for the divisional retained earnings accounts. The posting numbers are used during the year-end close are updated. And what we mean by that is that if you choose to reset your general ledger, you can then do it at that time. And then the previous year is moved to that account summary. All right. So we do suggest, as we mentioned before, to create that smart list, review the posting type setting just to make sure that it's correct. We talked about how to set up your fiscal periods already, so make sure to do your new calendar year. I apologize, it says 2019. We obviously want you to create your new year for 2021. And we want to make sure that the last periods are open in the years prior to close. All right, there's a setting called posting to history under your setup for your general ledger. we do recommend that you do check this setting under Setup Financial General Ledger. Make sure that your posting to history is marked if you want to allow people to post into the prior year. Otherwise, it will block them from posting into that prior year. You also want to make sure that maintain history box is checked. Otherwise, you will lose your history. It's very rare that somebody would change these settings, but it's always a good idea to check. And then, of course, you're going to go ahead and run that year-end closing process. As the year-end process closes, you'll see it go through each one of those 7 steps. At the end of that process, it'll print out a retained earnings report. If you have a problem during that process, let us know, but make sure you've taken your backup before you close, because the first thing we would recommend, go ahead and restore your backup and try it again. There are some issues that we've seen in older versions in the past. A lot of them don't occur in these current versions, but every once in a while there's a multi-currency issue that will get you hung up there. And of course, as we mentioned before, if you don't close the period, your financials will be difficult to generate for your balance sheet, because they won't be carrying those balances forward until you do close that fiscal year. All right, so here are the year-end close options. Within the unit accounts, you do have that option to set the clear balance during the year-end close. Also on your year-end closing screen, this is what the screen looks like. Here's your retained earnings account, and then if you're closing to segments as specified in the setup, there's an option here to maintain inactive accounts. If you use GL accounts simply for budget purposes, you want to make sure to check this box. That way you will not lose those accounts, because they won't hold any balances. So I do recommend when you're closing, make sure to check that box. All right, if you're closing in Dynamics GP R2, you do have that option to reverse the historical year. That's in GP, it's actually GP 20, I thought it was in GP 2013, but it is in GP R2 for sure. So you do have that option. If you have to post back further than 1 year, you've got that option there. All right. And if you have any questions about this process, we do recommend that you contact us. Here's our phone number, our email, support@iscorp.biz, and our consultants are here to make sure that we can answer any questions that you have. All right. We do have a question that's been asked. Can you install the year-end 1099 update prior to January 1st? Absolutely. We do recommend you install it as soon as possible once it's been released, but it does need to be installed for you to print your 1099s for the 2020 year to submit to the IRS. There is only one process in payroll that you don't want to do that's part of the year-end, which is the update the tax tables. That should wait. But we definitely want you to install that payroll and year-end tax or year-end update as soon as it was released in November. So if you haven't scheduled that with our consultants, reach out to us so we can get you on that schedule. Thank you. We have a couple more questions here. Hold on one second. I'm having some issues seeing the full question here. So we did answer that question. If you're on a fiscal year, do you need to run the payroll year close or just at year end? If your fiscal year is different than your calendar year, you don't need to run the payroll year end close until the end of the year. Because it's really meant for the taxes that you would generate, or the tax reports you would generate for the IRS, your W-2s and your 1095s. So you only need to close them at the end of the year. If you did not get the documents, let me know. My email address is jessica@iscorp.biz. Just shoot me an email and I will be happy to email those that Word document to you. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and you found this information helpful. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us by phone, support@iscorp.biz, or my personal email address, jessica@iscorp.biz. Thank you.